Hey, so you might be asking yourself, where do I begin with liquid cooling and where do I start? And I've been meaning to make a video on this for a while, but you know, it's a complicated subject and there's a lot to consider. So let's just start with EKWB. If you go to their website, it took me forever to figure this out, but they kind of advertise their configurator, and it gets really confusing because you're trying to make everything compatible. But basically, every liquid cooling loop will have either a GPU, a CPU, and then it'll also have radiators, fittings, and tubing. And you may want to include your motherboard as a part of the loop. But then if you do have a motherboard block, then it's usually like called a mono block. So it replaces a CPU loop. CPU block, sorry. So essentially either you're going to have the whole motherboard block, and then you're going to have your GPU, or just a CPU block and then a GPU. And then you're going to have your radiators, your tubing, your fittings, and that's pretty much all the loop is. It's just those few things. And before I started, I didn't really understand that, it looked really complicated, but that's all you really need to get going. Now, this configurator, I don't really recommend it, to be honest. What I would do is I would just jump straight to the website, and we'll go to their shop. And so here we go. We're in their shop, but you might be wondering what the heck do I do to get started if you're going to put together a loop. So what do you really need if you're going to have your loop? Well, I would start with your CPU block. The MX is the one that is kind of like this palm material. And it's not going to be see-through, but it's going to be a little bit cheaper. And then your EVOs are usually like the more expensive acrylic block. And they come in various colors, and really I would recommend just getting the Supremacy MX. And just pick if you're using Intel or AMD, and they have options for each. And so next you would throw that in your cart, and then you would get a full cover block. And what I recommend is getting like a Founders Edition card. They're just a lot easier to work with, and it seems like they're easier to find full blocks for. So I would just order that off nvidia.com or get it used. But then, okay, so you want a Founders Edition block. Well, really you can just use their search function and then look for TIFE. And it's pretty simple to find a block that is compatible. So they have their copper block and they have their nickel blocks, or just the Alcatel plus nickel. I recommend the nickel actually because it looks really nice, but if you must, you can actually use copper, and you don't have to worry about the copper degrading your loop because of mixed metals. Don't worry about it, it's fine, it is compatible. And so moving on, you want to get a pump and a reservoir, or a pump-res combo. So let's look at that. So there are two types. There's D5, which is more RPM, and it's usually quieter. And then there's DDC, which is smaller form factor, and usually it's not going to be as much power when it's pumping the water through your loop. And so what I did was I started out with the D5 pump res combo from EK because it was just the easiest, but as I started going, I started to put together loops that had these DDC pumps, and I'm actually a big fan of them now because DDC is usually cheaper. And so you can literally just go on Amazon and you can just look up DDC pump, and they have this really cheap pump here that you can use, and you can literally connect this to a reservoir, And there you go. You have a combo, and this is literally $33. So it's a great deal. I highly recommend it. And so you need a pump, and then you need a reservoir. So we're going to talk about reservoirs here. And for that, we're going to go to singularitycomputers.com. So let's go there. Oh, it's taking forever to load. Let's just go to singularitycomputers.com. And I'm a big fan of Singularity Computers. It's just very high quality, but we're going to go to their reservoirs. Let me Discord. And what we're going to do is you're going to select 350 is really huge. Basically, for me, I would select 250 to 150, somewhere in that range. But there's all these different millimeters of different sizes that can hold your liquid in there. And what you're going to want to do is get a pump that has a pump top, so it'll screw onto the bottom of your reservoir. And you can use either a DDC, or a D5 pump. But you need to make sure that it has, like I showed you here, it has to have this top here. You can also buy a pump that doesn't have the top, but then you'll need to buy a pump top. So there's that. And by the time you're all done with this, your lube should end up being around $400 to $500, give or take. It might be more, it might be less. So here, after you're done selecting your CPU block, your GPU block or blocks, and your pump and your reservoir, then you'll need a radiator. So I recommend that you use 2 different radiators if possible. One for your GPU and one for your CPU. But if you really do have to, then just buy one really large radiator for both. And I recommend 360 or more. So we'll look at here. 120 mil means 120 mil fans, 140 means 140 mil fans. So just keep that in mind. And I would highly recommend getting a thick radiator just so it's quieter. So if you're going to have your CPU and GPU and only one radiator, I would recommend this triple here. And then it's XE, so it's thick. If you're going to do 2 radiators, then I would recommend just looking at your case to see what kind of radiator it supports and just kind of go from there. And so they have this little guide. It's really confusing. So just look at the picture and you can kind of match up how many fans you'll need. For this, you'll need 4 120 mil fans. So that's how I would look at that. But it's usually pretty easy to tell what fans you need to slap onto the radiators. So just keep that in mind. And keep in mind that the more radiators you buy and the bigger radiators you buy, the more fans you'll have to purchase too. So once you have all of that, you'll buy your fittings. And so the standard for this has been, if you're doing hardline, then get these compression HDC fittings. If you're doing soft tubing, then do the ACF fittings. So you're also going to want to buy tubing. So I actually recommend the large tubing because it looks better. So you're going to try to get, I would do the largest tubing you can get. So I would do acrylic too. I just liked working with acrylic. And I would do this 12 to 16 millimeter tubing, or I would go on Singularity Computers and actually get their tube. I do think that Singularity Computers has a little bit higher quality tubing, so I would recommend the 16 mil tubing. And then I would go back to your EK and order your fittings and make sure you get the 12 by 16 millimeter or 16 millimeter hard compression fittings. And so you'll do 2 compression fittings per component. So 2 for your radiator, 2 for the GPU block, 2 for your CPU block. Any kind of component, you'll want to have 2 per. So let's say that you're doing CPU block, GPU block, 2 radiators, and then you'd have your pump and res. So that would also be 2, right? So you'll end up with around 10 compression fittings if you go for that style of loop. But just to be safe, I would order around 14. 14 seems pretty safe, and then that lets you expand later on, or if you lose something in the process, you'll have a few extras there. So you'll throw 14-ish fittings in your cart, and those are just straight compression. They include an O-ring, and they will seal off your components. So component to component will always need, or anything with tubing running through it will always need a compression fitting. So your tubing will go directly to your compression fitting, and it'll seal everything. So also in your cart, you're going to want to put adapters. So I would recommend per component about half of the amount of compression fittings you have, I would recommend getting adapters for. And to be honest, you might even want more than that. So like maybe like 10 to 12 angled fittings. And the 90 ones with rotary is the best. So we'll look here. So here's a 90 angled G4 fitting, and that's what I would get, is one with the one male and one female side. Those tend to be the most useful. I would not get the 2 female side. I would always stick with the males, but if you must, you can get the females, but I just haven't really found a good use for them, I guess. I did this one build where I used a lot of extenders. We'll talk about that too. But I would just go with these and get a ton of them, the 90 degree, and then maybe get like 4 of the 45 degree, and make sure that they're the rotary type. And so I would also get the 2x45 just in case you need to make awkward angles and you need to twist one end of this. They do come in handy from time to time. And so last, with fittings, you want to do extender fittings. So we'll look at static extenders. And you'll probably want to get like a few of each. So you'll want to get a few of the 6 mil, probably a few of the larger ones, and then a few of the 12 mil. So just get a good variety depending on what you plan on doing. So extenders give you space to kind of escape from tight situations. So I typically put them on radiators, and I'll just extend them down from hard to reach places so that you can get your tubing run up into the radiator without too much of a hand cramp. Those are what extenders are for, and I see a lot of people use them on their CPU block too, just in case they need a little bit of length to get past your RAM sticks, so keep that in mind. And so yeah, that's about it. I hope that was helpful. And then you'll also want to order coolant, and I highly recommend going to primochill.com, and I would order some View coolant. I'm a big fan, and it has this really cool swirling effect. So depending on your loop, I ordered, if you're doing a dual loop, then you should probably get 2 bottles of each color you're doing. If you're doing just one color and it's all a loop that's connected together, then I would get 2 bottles just in case you run out and you might need to top it off. I would go for the 2 bottle rule as a general. But that fluid is really expensive, so you can also use EK's cryo fuel, and there are a lot of other options. Like Mayhem's uses this UV, or you could do Mayhem's pastel, which is this solid color. So there are a ton of options out there. This is view, and really, you can do whatever you want, but I really like pretty much chill view just because it looks really neat. And so, okay, so when you are ordering tubing, I would order about 5 or so pieces of this. So they come in usually 2 packs. So on EK's website, if you're doing acrylic and you're doing the 12 to 16 millimeters, I would get 5 of these. So you're paying around $60 or $50 in tubing, but you want to get way more than what you think you will because you will mess up a ton. Next, I would also recommend getting the Primo Chill rigid finishing bit. And EK has a guide on how to convert US measurements, so like inches to millimeters. So please look that up. It's a really big help. But you will want to get this rigid finishing bit because this hacksaw crap doesn't do a thing. Like, it's really terrible. You will want the silicone inserts, so when you're doing your bends, you'll need a heat gun as well. So there's a lot to think about here, and it does get really complicated, but really there's only like 8 things or so you need to have in your brain when you're putting together a loop. And you just need to think about, I need this and this and this and this and this. You do not need to use the EK configurator or whatever else. You kind of just need to think about all the pieces that are going to fit together and then just order a lot of it. So that's almost it. If I left out anything, let me know, but that's pretty much it. You'll need pump res and fittings and radiators and blocks and fluid and silicone inserts and a way to cut your tubing, and you'll need tubing, and that's it. So I hope that kind of gave you a quick intro into putting together a loop, and hopefully recommendations like this will save you a little bit of money, because if you're to go on EK's website and order a pump combo, then I will just show you what that looks like. It's really expensive. So let's look at this. Pumps. So even just a pump by itself on EK's website is literally like over $150 or around $150. So that is just insane when you could go on Amazon and get one of these Chinese pumps for $30. So just keep that in mind so you can keep your costs low. And if you have any questions, just let me know and I'd be happy to help you. And have a great day. Hope that helps.